let's go ahead and get going, don't you think?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right.
Liz says she's going to cram like 8 hours of stuff into like an hour. So we got to see how fast she can talk.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for our industry update this month. We're super excited to have you. I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of the upcoming industry updates that we have coming up in the future. One second. Okay, so save the dates for August 5th. We're going to have Terry Williams. He's a VP of underwriting for Heritage Title. He's going to be on talking about title issues. September 2nd, Mark Patinas is he's a real estate litigator. He's going to be talking about when buyers and sellers sue one another. That's going to be a really fun topic. And October 7th, Damien will be back and talking about the 2022 upcoming form changes. So definitely don't want to miss that one. And November 4th, we'll have Paul Bondi back on again, and he will be discussing E&O insurance coverage. Make sure you've all got all the appropriate coverages that you need for your business. So save those dates, and we hope you join us for some future updates. And with that, I want to give a huge welcome to Liz Peetz. She has joined us today. She's the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Colorado Association of Realtors. She directs the public policy efforts for CAR. She specializes in policy development, advocacy, and legislative affairs. She oversees CAR's Legislative Policy Committee and candidate endorsement process. She's a licensed attorney in Colorado, Nebraska, and Washington, D.C. And prior to her work with CAR, she had 15 plus years of experience in government affairs and legal analysis in Washington, D.C. and in Colorado. Her previous roles include U.S. congressional staffer, and also she's done work in various business and nonprofit organizations focusing on healthcare-related issues, counterterrorism, legal operations, litigation, and democracy promotion and civil society training. So what an extraordinary resume you have, Liz, and what an incredible advocate we have for the Realtor R in you here in Colorado. So thank you so much again for your time today and giving us an update on what you've been up to this last year. So if you'd like to take it away. Oh, and everybody, if you have questions, please put those in the Q&A versus chat. It's just a little easier to manage over there, and we won't have anybody unmute. You're not on video. This is just webinar format only. So pop your questions in Q&A and we'll get those answered for you. So thank you, Liz. Take it away.
You might point out that she's also the hardest working person at CAR. Of course, don't let Scott and Ty and some of those other guys hear that, but nonetheless, she busts her butt every single session for you guys. So
yes, she does.
Well, thank you, Jill and Damien. Yeah, I think this session was a particularly exhausting one. We are going to try to tackle a lot of topics in the next hour, but I'm sure we're not going to get to it all. I mean, I could be here talking for 4 hours about what happened in this legislative session, but we're going to zero in on the biggest issues for housing, and we'll get to as many as we can in an hour, but feel free to follow up with me after, or Damien after, to find out, other things that we didn't get to, because there's a lot to cover and we'll get through as much as we can.
Awesome.
So I'm going to start with the legislation that CAR championed and created in partnership with Habitat for Humanity. This package of 4 bills we call the Century of Opportunity. And I'm very excited to announce, as of today, all 4 bills have been signed by the governor. We're super excited about that. And we're actually going to be talking on a national webinar in a week or two about how we can increase the supply of housing for federal congressional staff based on this package of 4 bills. So it's exciting to see Colorado lead the way.
And Liz, I mean, you guys really were the spirit, the point of the spear in this thing. I think it's important that everybody knows this wasn't just something you guys got on board with. This is your baby.
Yeah, I mean, we started with focus groups last November and December, trying to figure out how do we increase the supply of housing? Where are the gaps as we're having all these conversations on racial justice? Does everyone have access to home ownership? What are the barriers? What can we do to take those conversations to a place where we actually put forward proactive, impactful public policy that makes a difference. And what's exciting about this package is we think it's going to spur the next decade of policy in Colorado. And we're thrilled that it's going to be so well funded. There's 4 bills in the package. The first bill is House Bill 1200, and it requires every high schooler to graduate with financial literacy requirements in their curriculum. They have to learn about managing student debt and preparing for higher education opportunities, understanding credit card use and how that affects your credit generally, preparing for retirement, and of course, preparing for home ownership. So that's a great way to get the next decade of folks ready to get to homeownership when they want to go there. The second bill is House Bill 1028, and this is really exciting because we're for the first time going to require the Division of Local Affairs and the Division of Housing to report annually on how we spend our housing dollars. So whether it's federal or state funds, they have to say how many units are we creating or preserving, and what type of project is it? Is it supportive or rapid rehousing? Is it rental? Is it home ownership? And this data-based approach that will be a public report that anyone can access every year is going to give us a better way to make decisions in a quantitative and qualitative way so that we're actually addressing housing throughout the state. Because as many of you know, the inventory is lacking in every single 64 counties that we have. So this is a really good forward-thinking bill too. And then the last 2 bills in the package are really innovative, and we're really excited about them. The third one is House Bill 1134, and it is a pilot program. So the state is going to invest dollars to pilot this program in coordination with CHAFA, and the program will allow renters who are part of housing provider participant universes to report their rental payment to the credit bureau. That way they can build their credit for a renter, much like we already build credit in the mortgage side. This isn't being done yet across the country. It's one of the first in the nation to actually take this on. And we're super psyched about it and working with the Credit Builders Alliance because we've seen they have some programs like this in other states, but it's never been addressed for market rate housing. It's only been on the subsidized voucher universe. So this is really going to give us an idea of how this program could succeed for both tenants and landlords. And we're thrilled that we get to be an innovative partner in finding out how that works. And then the last bill, which is probably the biggest bill of the bunch, is House Bill 1271. And this bill is creating 3 new grant programs in the Division of Local Affairs, and essentially it meets local governments where they are and trying to spur housing creation. The idea is to stretch local governments further than they can currently go right now. So there's 3 different components. The first phase, the toolkit phase, means you kind of need some help from the state to do some community stakeholdering and figure out what your community needs to actually target a housing creation project. The second phase, the planning grant, is getting some technical expertise or a consultant to help you get it to the next level and prepare for a housing incentives grant. And the housing incentives grant allows any local government that takes on at least 3 of a menu of options of best practices in affordable housing development or reduces regulatory barriers to get a grant from the state for what they're doing. So oftentimes the local government may not be able to afford the reduced permit cost if they were to give that benefit or absorb that themselves, or maybe allow for master metering or accessible dwelling units or increased density. And also the cool thing about the program is it allows for an innovative approach that's not in the menu, but the division could consider. After 3 years, they're going to report back, and we hope this becomes an ongoing program that the general fund could fund. This year it's funded by federal dollars, and it started out at 13 million. And after we got the ARPA funds, it's now near 40 million in funding that we get to spend in the next 3 years to actually create housing. So get all your local planning nerds and friends to apply for this grant, because once the money's gone, it's gone.
Nerds, they have to be nerds.
Yeah, people like me, or you know those developers and creators in your universe, like get them to work with their local governments to apply for these funds.
Maybe not call them nerds when you do it, but yes. Now that's really exciting. I mean, that's some good legislation that you guys put together.
Yeah, we're super excited. And when you see Habitat for Humanity folks, tell them congrats too. They worked with us to develop this menu, and everyone in the state can look at it. So it's really exciting.
Awesome.
So we can segue to some other bills that we did not create, but that we were very heavily involved in. And I think I'll start with some transparency bills.
Liz, I'm going to ask you a quick one. I don't know if you
Yeah.
know the answer to this yet or not, but there was some questions. There was a question about the housing grants, and
Yeah.
and so it was, how do you apply for the grants? When does it go into effect? Does it have to be the government entity, or can a nonprofit do these things? Do we have any structure around it at all now, that maybe you could just give some people a taste of what that's going to look like?
Yes, thank you for keeping me accountable and checking the Q&A. So
I think that's our job anyway. So
it is the local government that has to apply for the funds, because this is coming from the Division of Housing and Department of Local Affairs. If a nonprofit is part of the project, that's okay. It's just that the nonprofit can't themselves apply. The funds go to the local government. The other thing is the Division of Local Affairs is going to be putting together rules and policies and procedures that will help guide how to apply. And they will be looking at a time frame of looking at that over the summer to early fall. I would guess, they haven't announced this yet, but if I was a betting person, I'd guess applications would open in January, but it kind of depends on their staffing levels. And what's really important is those policies and procedures are going to guide which projects get awarded. So obviously you want to do as much as you can to create a lot of housing in your projects, but also be thoughtful about how do you address inclusive communities. There is criteria in the bill that they have to look at geographies throughout the state. So it can't just be a front range grant. It has to be statewide. So they'll have to balance that based on the applications that come forward. And I should mention, there's also a land donation and land banking in the menu. So there's a lot of really innovative ways that local governments can work with communities to bring forward a competitive application.
Nice, thank you.
All right.
Now you want to move on to your other stuff? I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I thought it might be helpful for people to hear the answers while we're still on the topic.
Oh yeah, no, good catch. So segueing back to transparency bills, I would put two in this category. One is Senate Bill 262, and this is special district transparency. This is really important, and we may even see future legislation next session, but I think many of you guys saw the article in the Denver Post that we all read about just how complicated our property taxes are. And when it involves a special district, how much do you know as a buyer going into that purchase, or are you surprised 2 years down the line when you get your assessment back? This bill is going to target a couple of things, but the most important thing that we cared about and that we worked on most strongly in the bill is that transparency for consumers. So if you are buying new construction, you now as a purchaser will get from the builder or developer who's selling you that unit the estimate of what your property taxes will be. So you're going to have a lot more information going into knowing what your mortgage payment and taxes are going to be. The bill also does a couple of other things to make citizens more aware of the election process. so that you can get on the board that makes decisions on your taxes in your special district. And for those of you that are like, what is a special district? Think about your either a metro district that helps build the infrastructure in your community, or fire districts are special districts. The Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. So if you guys go to the Art Museum or the Natural Science Museum, any of those things, there's lots of different types of special districts. This falls in housing when we think about the Metro District component in terms of understanding your tax basis. So a really good bill. We're excited about that one becoming law. And then the second one in the transparency category is House Bill 1229. I know we have been talking about HOA fees and status charge letters forever.
Yeah, you're going to get a lot of people that are going to perk up when you start talking about this one.
Yeah, drum roll, please.
Well, I'm excited to announce that in the HOA regulation bill, we put in, or actually ensured the amendment stayed in, the requirement that the HOA has to give you a list of all of their fees that they're charging. So we're not going to be surprised at the closing table anymore, which is really great news.
Yeah. Now I want to kind of warn some people here. I mean, the bill is fantastic. Don't get me wrong. And the transparency is something we needed. We do need to keep in mind that HOAs have a tendency of not catching up very quickly as to what they have to do. So there is going to be a learning curve on this as HOAs, particularly self-managed HOAs, don't realize that this is a requirement. So, you know, it's fantastic. I don't want to take away from what you guys were able to accomplish in this, because God knows we've been trying forever, but keep in mind, it might take a while to work its way through.
Agreed. They will have to adjust, as Damien says, and we'll try to get some information out to you guys as we follow up and with Scott and Damien about like when they're required to start having this in place, because the effective date of when they have to do this doesn't necessarily mean they will all get it done on time, and you're going to have to keep them accountable.
Hey, so you guys are going to put some stuff together for them to actually give to the HOAs?
Well, we don't have anything proactively put together, but I think what we'd like to do, and I got to talk to Scott more about this, is
can I make a project for Scott? I would love to make a project for Scott.
I think it's just, we want to make sure you know when the effective date is, so you know when you could actually say, hey, if you don't provide me this information, you are subject to a penalty in the legislation.
Yeah, that'd be great. That the education is going to be crucial on this.
Yeah, maybe it'll be one of Scott's top 10 things.
Or maybe we could have him develop a piece. I think he should do a PowerPoint presentation to HOAs across the entire. I'm just kidding.
Do they have to make those fees public to anybody who reaches out for that information? If it's a title company or if you're the buyer?
It's for the purchaser, the way the legislation is written. I think there's probably a little bit of a gray area of someone acting on behalf of a purchaser, and I think that we may have to ferret out in practice.
Okay.
And the forms committee, one of the forms that was just approved is going to be this authorization on HOA. So hopefully that'll help with title companies or somebody else getting the information, but I'm not sure. It's all so new. We'll see.
Yes, sometimes I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, right? We pass legislation and then the next phase is implementation. And then we have to figure out practically on the ground, how is it going to work? Are there rules coming out? Are there compliances we have to think? And then if something isn't working as well, we may, clean it up next year if it's not working well enough. So just keep that in mind as we're talking about all this legislation. There's implementation after we pass it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm sure that your members will be happy to tell you what's working and what's not working. So
yep, send them our way. We'll get it taken care of, or at least we'll address it with the right folks at the regulatory bodies.
I also want to thank you for not changing the special taxing district legend that goes in the contract as the guy on the forms committee that gets to change those things. I know that was in a previous version that you guys said that didn't make a lot of sense. So that was nice as well.
Yeah, we worked really hard to make sure you as brokers are not liable for going out and finding the information. We tried to tell them, look, you can't make somebody accountable for the information they don't have. The other part of the bill requires these special districts to put information out on their website. So to that extent, that part would be public. You would be able to go search that on a website, but it's not, it doesn't make any sense for the broker to be responsible for information they don't create.
Yeah, and I'd rather that not become our job as brokers. So,
Yep.
well, that's great. Those are great. You want to talk it? So we've got the good. You want to talk about the bad before we get to the ugly?
Yeah, I guess I would say these were, I would put in the, it could be worse category.
Yes.
We got, I guess what I would say is a mixed result on these bills. And the first one I would put in that lineup would be House Bill 1117. This is the bill that allows for inclusionary zoning. And essentially what we were trying to prevent is a backdoor to rent control, right? We wanted to make sure that by opening up the town of Telluride case to allow for inclusionary zoning, we didn't say, oh, that means anyone can do rent control.
Liz, I'm going to ask you to back up a little bit and talk about the Telluride case, just so that they know what you mean by when you say opening up the case and what
Sure.
that means as far as the legislation. I want to make, I mean, some of these, I know some of the people on worked with you extensively, so know exactly what you're talking about, but there's others that maybe don't.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Let's give you the background before we get into how the bill changed. So rent control in Colorado is prohibited under Tabor, but there was a case, and I'm not going to remember what year it was, but several years ago, where the town of Telluride pursued an inclusionary zoning ordinance that did regulate rent in a certain way. And the Colorado Supreme Court said that inclusionary zoning, to the extent that it was, in their opinion, rent control, was outlawed too. So we've had a big push at the Capitol for 3 to 4 years to say we need rent control in Colorado, which we've always said no to. I mean, rent control and controlling the market actually hurts more than it helps, because we actually help only a small group of haves at the expense of most have-nots, and we subsidize one group and then increase rents for others to make up the difference. So what we did in the bill is first lock down the past Tabor part of rent control, meaning that we said we made them put in a specific bill, because the bill wasn't drafted very well. It was like artfully crafted very poorly so that it could be construed broader than I think anyone wanted. So what we did was put in an amendment that said this is not rent control. So for existing buildings, you can't control rent. What the bill does then target is new development. And when they do new development, what's really good about the bill that a lot of other stakeholders worked on is they can't just say, if I give a developer an option, I can do whatever I want. They actually have to consider a lot of density options and criteria. And it actually kind of relates back to our bill, the 1271 bill, and some of the menu options. And this came from the governor's office and other stakeholders saying, look, inclusionary zoning is kind of a blunt tool. If you don't think about it carefully, it can be actually just pushing development to another local jurisdiction further away, rather than taking on the extra regulations. So they do have to consider parking and density requirements and think about that when they pursue an inclusionary zoning ordinance. So again, a mixed result. The bill could have been a lot worse, but I think some local governments do see inclusionary zoning as a tool that they want to have in their arsenal. So.
Yeah, I think that's great explanation. Thank you.
Yes. And then One of the other bills I want to talk about in the housing context, a couple of bills dealing with landlord, tenant, and property management. We obviously know these bills have been on the topics of legislators' minds for a couple of years now. And the fights keep getting more intense every session.
Yeah, it's been several years that you've been dealing with these and trying to push back on some of the things that they've been trying to pass. I mean, this is, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really tough environment, and Colorado's not the only one facing these landlord tenant bills. These bills are kind of sweeping across the country, especially in legislators that have more left-leaning control. Um, we have been able to find some carve outs here in Colorado that our other colleagues have not in other states. So we've really tried to find a way to be the middle and really like push away all the deal breakers that would just stymie a functioning market. And I will say it wasn't easy this session. We have been fighting for the single family exemption of 5 units or fewer for the last couple of sessions. And this year, when we raised that at the Capitol, some folks accused us of being racist because we wanted to protect small mom and pop landlords. And we're never going to not defend small businesses. That's just insane for the ugliness of the emotional politics of the day to characterize that amendment in that way. But what we were able to do is actually find a piece in Senate Bill 173, particularly of federal law, the Miss Murphy's exemption, and actually take that out of Colorado law without damaging our stance for property owners, because it's a little known esoteric component of federal law. And by taking it out of Colorado's law, like 2 or 3 other states have done, we were able to give the bill proponents a little bit of a win and then protect against the worst parts of the bill. So I can walk you through, we'll do 173 first, and then we'll go to 1121. But both of these bills started out in a really horrible, I hate this bill, none of this works, veto immediately, to a middle ground. So the bills got much better through the legislative process, and that is really due to CAR and other stakeholders' work pressing upon some of the housing provider legislators at the Capitol. So they really did help us.
And I got to tell you, I mean, what you guys did was absolutely incredible, because there were a lot of stakeholders that went in with it's a non-starter, we're just opposing it, and that's it. And the problem is something was going to be passed. And not having a seat at the table means you get worse legislation than having a seat at the table and negotiating something that's better. And you guys just, Jason did a heck of a job. I know you did a heck of a job of just trying to make sure that you stayed in the conversation to try and at least mitigate some of the damage that came out of these things.
Yeah, one of the things that we work really hard on at CAR is to be a collaborative focus in the debate and the discussion around these bills. In fact, when I looked back at the original meetings that we got from legislators before the session started, knowing these bills were coming that other stakeholders didn't get, we basically told them all the different parts of the bill that were deal breakers, that were going to be really hard for our members. And when I looked back at the final bill, nearly every single one of them we got taken out of the bill or changed. And that's a really good feeling when you look back, even though the bill's not perfect. And I'm never going to say it's a perfect bill, because I think we would prefer a freer market. But there's a lot of things we took out of the bill that were very damaging. And so in 173, we took out trial by jury. We took out deceptive trade practices and attorney general suits. So you're not going to be sued when your lease changes or you don't keep compliant with the late fee changes. Several of the court process in the bill was more in favor of the tenant, not the housing provider. So there were several pieces throughout the bill that moved to either party request. And then we narrowed the focus of the tenant document retention. So you don't have to provide the entire tenant record when you go towards an eviction. You only have to provide what's relevant to the actual court case. The defense and answer period is different. The grace period of being late is 7 days, where it started out at 14. And then there's the fees and charges. So on the tenant side, it was $20. Well, we moved it up to 50. It was 2.5% charge of late fees. We moved that up to 5%. On the landlord side and the penalty side, it went from $2,000 to $150. And then the costs go to the prevailing party, not just only you get costs if you're the tenant and you win. And then the default late day goes to 10 instead of, again, being 14. And this actually tracks back with what current law already was. So we basically got them to hold to the line of where we were 2 years ago. And we weren't the only ones. So, I mean, that is with our partners in the Apartment Association and the Landlord Coalition. I mean, we were all asking for different things, but together we were able to take out the worst parts of the bill. And it's a better bill at the end of the day. Is it perfect? No, but it's much better in terms of taking out the worst pieces of the bill.
Would you go ahead and just kind of summarize what's changed too, so that people have a gauge? I know a lot of the people on here are either landlords or work with landlords. I know there's a couple property managers on here, just so that they know what's coming. They're going to need more on this, obviously, than just this session, but at least they have a gauge, have an idea as to what to look for.
Yeah. And I think we hope that there will be some really good documents that come out, not just sort of from us, but some of the landlord and apartment folks. I know the Cheddar Group always does really good detailed memos about what's different in the law, but essentially what this bill 173 is targeted at is late fees, right? So you're now not going to be able to charge whatever you want for a late fee. It is limited, sort of capped in these new targets. And then also your process through the court in an eviction is going to be different, in the sense that you will have points throughout the court case where you're going to be required to provide information to the other side. Importantly, some of the court process is also narrowed, in the sense that I know many of you were concerned about the fact that a warranty of habitability defense could be raised later after the court case had started. A lot of the beginning of the case is sort of front loaded in that answer to the summons. So they really do have to put that in right at the beginning. And then just keeping in line with your timeframes, right? So being at 10 days rather than further out. Although I'm sure many of you guys were closer to 5 or 7 with some of your timelines, but there's a grace period of being late of 7 days, but then the court timelines are 10 days. But that should be standard already, because we, again, already put that in the right to cure. You had 10 days. So hopefully a lot of your practices were at least adjusted to that 10-day time frame. But again, we'll work with our stakeholders and colleagues to get some more robust guidance out for you to like sort of track where the changes are.
Great, thank you.
Perfect. Well, and then we can go to 1121, the other big landlord tenant bill of the session. So this bill deals with rent increases and the eviction court process, a little bit more than 173. I didn't touch on unwanted removal. You won't be able to just remove a tenant without reason. I suspect many of you weren't already doing that. I mean, maybe there was a couple of really bad actors out there who were doing that, but that isn't going to be allowed in the law anymore. But most of you guys, when you go to an eviction, you're going for a reason. There's a substantial violation or there's non-payment. So this bill started out, again, a lot worse than it ended up. So originally, you were going to be able to pay your rent and stay in the property up to 48 hours after a judgment was received when you get the writ of restitution. And we said that why would you go to court if you could then win the case, but then still have to keep the tenant after 48 hours after the court case? That makes no sense. So we changed it down to it's actually at the judgment that the writ of restitution can be issued. And then the biggest difference here is the execution. So the execution by the sheriff or the officer in the original version said 14 days. We got it down to 10. Of course, we wished it could have been smaller than that, but that was the negotiation point that we were able to get. Many counties I know, just because of the backlog, aren't even able to serve in 10 days. So hopefully in most counties, this is actually not changing your timeframes too much unless you had a very proactive sheriff's department. But yes, it'll move to 10 days instead of 48 hours, but it could have been 14. So it could have been a lot worse. The appearance is now between 7 and 14 days of when you serve. The other thing that we normalized is the court process. So the original bill said you as a property manager had to go personally serve a defendant. Well, honestly, that's scary. I mean, I don't want to be out there serving, whether it's COVID reasons or I'm scared that the tenant could be violent. We now changed it back to a normal service of process, and your attorney could do it. It doesn't have to be you individually. And then the money will be paid to the court. So I think, again, we like that stability in the court being the receiver of the funds and preserver of the funds pending the outcome of the case. And then finally, in one of the committees, they tried to strike the single family exemption that we had from 1118 from 2 years ago. And we were able to, again, get them to not go back on promises that CAR has already received. And so that is the right to cure is still preserved. So we didn't strike compromises we already received 2 years ago. So.
Which is amazing that you had to fight for that, but.
Yeah, I mean, I will say it's a hard environment coming post-COVID with these landlord-tenant issues, because we had so many of our folks, not having funds to pay their rent. But one important thing, and we really need to give you guys the breaking news if you haven't seen it already, but one of the biggest compromises that came out of both these landlord-tenant bills is we're not getting an extension of the eviction moratorium in Colorado longer than the federal guideline.
Yeah,
the original bill draft was into September of 22.
Yeah, that's where these bills started, was to try and extend statutorily eviction moratoriums for COVID into that, which was amazing. I mean, it was pretty extensive.
So we're glad that bill draft didn't even get introduced. And now, if you have seen the most recent executive order from Governor Polis and the outcome of the U.S. Supreme Court case, the eviction moratorium is extended through the end of July, but that's the last time. After that, we're not extending it.
Yeah, that's a good thing to raise, is, and that actually goes for the foreclosure moratorium too. So everything is rolling off at the end of July, which Liz, you and I had talked about this, that there was concerns that it might go through September of this year. And then obviously the bills wanted it even longer than that. So at least we're starting to see a return to some form of normalcy, even though these bills are going to affect people that are landlords, because it is going to change some timeframes.
Yep. And there is an affordable housing task force interim committee meeting over the summer. They will be negotiating and debating how to spend the nearly $500 million we're getting from the federal government in housing assistance. I wouldn't be surprised if some of those supportive rent, either landlord or tenant, from COVID get carried over a little bit, but we also may see some other forward policy. There was a couple other bills in the legislature that allow us to repurpose commercial property which is really interesting, whether it's for purchasing a hotel and making it a shelter for rapid rehousing or supportive housing, or repurposing main streets and building unique, taking those commercially properties that may not have full use post-COVID because we're changing. I think that might factor into some of the task force's work this summer. And all of that will be next session's job to spend the funds so that the committee created deliberates and they make recommendations. They don't do bill drafts. It'll still go through the same process of legislation next year, but it could tie into some of these landlord tenant issues.
So you'll be busy again.
Yes, but not till next January, although we are working to make sure some housing provider groups are part of that task force, and you can apply to get on that task force, but we know some of our members have already done that. The other thing too, if you haven't seen it, go check out the Common Sense Institute report on housing affordability. It was just released on their website. It's 64 pages, a nice long read, but it's really got some innovative ideas in there, and I think you guys will find it really interesting.
You were planning on, I think, posting that on your website at some point, weren't you? Or so.
Yes, it will be on our website, so we will share it out through the CAR website as well, and we'll be linking it. And it actually went out in the online news, or it will be on Saturday, so check your online news.
And Jill can even post it too.
I sure can. Yep, we can include that in our follow-up.
So, I mean, I think here we are 40 minutes in and we've only gotten through what, 10 bills?
Yeah. Well, there wasn't any more than that, right? I mean, we're done, right?
Only about 600 bills, but on our bill sheet, I think CAR took positions on about 95 bills. That's an uptick from our average of 80, and then staff tracked another 44 on top of that. So let's get through a couple more before we get...
Yes, that sounds great.
There were 7 to 8 wildfire bills, and what's really exciting for us is we've been struggling and begging and pleading with the legislature to fund wildfire mitigation because our fire seasons keep getting longer and worse every year. And it started us fighting for just a wildfire tax mitigation credit in like 2016 or 2017. To now this year, when we have good funding from the federal government and a better than expected economic recovery post-COVID, we now have 7 to 8, maybe 9 bills dealing with wildfire mitigation. And so that is a huge step up. We're going to give our communities the ability to buy a Firehawk helicopter where they can put, I was just hearing from Senator Rankin yesterday, they can put 10 firefighters and the water on the helicopter and rapid response it out. So it's a really big step forward for Colorado. Also, we're going to allow some really interesting incremental, like many of you guys have heard of TIF or urban renewal, tax increment financing. We're now going to allow local governments to partner in funding wildfire mitigation as a county in collaboration with nonprofits. We're also going to increase funding to the Department of Natural Resources. And unfortunately, there's one bill we don't like, that 1208 bill that actually we think violates Tabor, but it will allow some costs to go up on the insurance side to mitigate wildfires. We lost that battle, but I mean, I guess you'll see it on your insurance statements probably relatively soon, but we don't know how much it will be. I think it'll vary depending on who opts into that. So talk to your insurance folks about that, about how they're making changes. And then that's kind of the wildfire bills, but I do have some more other, what I'll call other bills that don't really fall into any one category.
The potpourri of bills.
Yes. Starting with 1195. 1195 is important to you and your clients because now radon professionals and mitigators are going to be licensed. We did make the point throughout the session of, hey, some home inspectors are radon mitigators and they're not licensed either, but maybe we'll have a toehold for that to try again in the future.
Do you know who the radon is licensed through? Is that just occupations?
Yep, just Dora.
Okay.
So they'll have CE and they'll have continuing education requirements, and there will be standards. I think the biggest concern is radon's a big issue in Colorado, and many of you guys know this in your transactions. But we need someone who has the same rules in Denver versus Clear Creek County. So we really need to make sure that we could protect consumer safety. And so this actually passed the legislature with bipartisan support this year,
Wow.
which is not usually the case with our licensure and regulatory bill.
No, it is amazing. I'm still surprised that they didn't go to other people and license others like home inspectors or some of the others that have been on the agenda for, I know you guys have been pushing for that for a long time at CAR. So
Yeah, we think it's a consumer safety issue. Unfortunately, we have not won over many of our Republican colleagues in that argument, but we're going to keep fighting that battle because we think it's worth it.
yeah.
The other one in our other category would be 1286, and this is the benchmarking bill. So this bill, as it started out, again, way worse than where it ended up, but it would have required every industry, including the building industry, which we care about, to put in place rules and regulations for how they're going to meet emission standards from a bill in the past session of 1261. Thankfully, we were able to convince them that, hey, the problem is you can't set a standard that then gets chained by the federal government. Like if you are a LEED certified or performance star, any of that kind of, then you think about some of the commercial PACE, all those programs, they all have different criteria. And then you may be like on level, I'm just going to say best because they all have different scales. And then they change the rules on you midstream, and then all of a sudden you're not compliant. Well, this would have put in place fees and penalties for every time you're not at the top level, and you have to be at the top level a certain, if you're over 50,000 square feet. So think about like Walmart sized buildings. So thankfully the bill got amended down so that there's going to be a task force that works on this, and it will become part of the CDPHE I'm going to get the acronym wrong, Air Quality and Control Commission regulatory process. So that's obviously going to be a regulatory process we're going to want to watch more closely because those costs do get passed down to consumers. And then I got two other bills that we kind of were able to kill or didn't come to fruition.
So these are the ugly.
These are the ugly that like they should have never gotten that far. And thankfully one died and well, they both died actually. So first one is I think it's 127, but I could get my numbers wrong here. It was the disaster emergency bill. So this would have given powers to the Division of Regulatory Affairs, i.e. the Attorney General, who supervises the Department of Regulatory Agencies, the ability to put forward emergency powers. So obviously you guys know during the emergency powers we faced during COVID, having a division who doesn't know anything about real estate define what a real estate transaction is kind of problematic.
Yeah, you guys fought that battle back in April of 2020, I believe. So trying to explain to people that transactions are not just when it goes under contract and or when it closes. Transactions include inspections and contracts and listings and
Right. And if your photographer isn't part of the group, but you're allowed to do a virtual showing, how can you do a virtual showing if you can't film the property?
Yeah, I mean, that was a big mess. And that all stemmed from a interpretation by the Attorney General as to what a real estate transaction was. So
yes. So this bill would have given that control over permanently. And we said, you know what, we don't like that. We like the ability to have the conversation with the governor's office and with the Division of Real Estate to understand and help those folks who don't do real estate on a daily basis what a real estate transaction is. So that bill thankfully died and did not change the way that we advocate for our industry going forward.
now that's fantastic. That was a big deal.
Yes, that was a really big deal. And then one of the late breaking bills that you probably didn't hear too much about, because Scott and I did a lot of behind the scenes work on this one, is 176. So it would have changed employer employment labor law in the sexual harassment context. But the biggest thing that we were working towards was an amendment based on you guys' status as independent contractors. Again, people think that like we're regulating gig workers, but real estate agencies, brokers are structured in a different business model than most people understand. So we got promises from the bill proponents that they would make sure that our definition matched up to the IRS code the way it currently does in federal law. However, the bill was killed in committee, so I'm sure it'll be back next year. But I think we did a lot of good pre-work so that when it comes up again next year, they'll just write that into the bill. We won't have to amend it.
That'd be nice. Yeah, that's a big deal.
And I guess we have a few minutes left. I don't see any questions, so I'll get to one last topic.
Yeah, don't feel like you have to fill the whole time. If you have stuff to talk about, that's great. I know, before you get to your other topic, you had mentioned that you're working on something that's going to be, I guess, a digest or something about the bill session, or is that right? Or
Yes, we always do a legislative review. And this year we're going digital, so there won't be printed copies, but that's also going to allow us to be more comprehensive. So it's going to have a lot of really great information and resources. And I think we're going to hopefully get some videos and breakouts of some of the components. I can't be as funny as Scott on Legal Bites, but we'll see what we can do.
yeah, he is a bit of a goofball, but
He's the funniest, most knowledgeable lawyer I know.
well, and if you get that, I'm sure Jill would be happy to share that as well, so that anybody that's on this or watches this later can at least go visit the legislative material that you have to get more information about what you've discussed. And I'm sure, this is a lot to digest in an hour of trying to understand the bills. So
Yes, and don't be shy. You can always follow up with myself or Bridget on my staff if you have questions about any of the bills. We lived it and breathed it for 117 some days, and so we're happy to answer any questions if you guys think of things as these things roll out. But to that last topic, and I kind of feel bad ending on a heavy topic like this, but property taxation and assessment. This is honestly becoming one of the biggest areas that we're focusing on now. A lot of it is coming on the heels of the Gallagher repeal. And again, look, we warned people there would be unintended consequences when we repealed that. And I'm sad to say our warnings came sooner than I had hoped, because we dealt with a lot of property tax assessment bills this session, and two in particular. 1312 is one of those bills that restructures all the tax code, but the part that we cared about was the original bill draft, and it actually would have changed the residential assessment and commercial assessment to what's called best and highest use. This is maybe used in personal business property or commercial context, but it's not used in residential. So if you have a property and you have a home on it, if it was a higher value to build condos or a mall or something that is just a better tax revenue source, they could tax you at that rate, which makes no sense. And if you have an agricultural farm, if you could put condos on that instead of the farm, we're going to lose some of our ag industry. So we got them to completely modify the bill and use what's called fee simple estate, which is, I'm not going to go into because you don't want to deal with property law the way that Damien and I did in law school, but it's a better definition.
I imagine some of the people on this call know exactly what you're talking about, though. So go ahead.
So some of you may know the legal terminology, but essentially we changed that bill to make it not subject to variable taxation. And that's really important. The other bill is 293, and this bill was dropped in the last 7 days of session. I don't like really big change bills that are dropped that late in the session because they're not stakeholdered and there's a lot of unintended consequences. This affects your November ballot. So there's an initiative out there called Initiative 27 that would permanently reduce your commercial and residential property tax rates and decrease them. This bill by the legislature actually changes that initiative and makes that lowered property assessment rate only temporary for a couple of years. It also creates new classes of property, which we are worried about what that portends for the future. Instead of having one class of residential, there's now two classes, single family and multifamily. There's now 4 classes of what we used to call non-residential, but commercial, vacant, and energy producing facility. We think this sets the ground eventually for them to start taxing different types of property differently. And we'll be watching out very closely for that in the future and how it could affect things like short-term rentals and bills that might come forward next session. So, and then the last thing the bill does is actually allow for you to defer if your property taxes increase more than 4%, I think up to 10,000, you can defer when you pay those increased taxes at the transaction, the next transaction you have. So, I mean, there's a little bit of good in there for property owners, but we're worried about what happens next.
Yeah, and Gallagher, we haven't even seen the consequences on him, just the way it was repealed and the fact that the values of all the residential went up through June of 2020 in the next period. So when people get their tax bills even next year, it's gonna increase probably more than people expect because of the Gallagher vote that was taken.
Yep,
But
now we're not tethered. So now
yeah.
we have to watch very closely what the legislature does.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Do we have any questions, Jill?
Doesn't look like it. Does anybody have any questions out there about anything we've covered today or didn't cover? You can put those in the Q&A. We're happy to answer them. So,
Liz, do you have anything else or do you want to wrap it up here?
I think aside from starting into launching a big topic on transportation in 2 minutes, I don't think we can do that, but, and it depends on where you sit in the state, but I don't know, Damien, if you guys have anything that you want to think about or announce to folks that might change what the Forms Committee looks at based on legislation you've seen yet, or?
No, the best part about the, what you guys did was that we didn't have to change stuff because of the stupid statutory language they like to make us put in the contracts. We are going to have new forms and we'll talk about those in October. And I'm sure everybody's just so excited like I am.
Yes, come to the Broadmoor, hang out with us.
Oh, yes. That's right. The 100-year celebration is going to be in October. It's fantastic. If you guys haven't heard, CAR is having that this year in October. It's in person. It's going to be quite the event, I've heard. So yeah, get your tickets. But I don't have anything else. Honey, do you want to wrap up? And I think, and we'll go from there.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Liz, we can't thank you enough for taking time today to give us that overview. That was super interesting. And thank you so much for working so hard for us and for our industry this last year. You pulled some amazing tricks out of your hat. So you are a powerhouse superstar woman, and we're just so fortunate to have you as an advocate for our industry. Thanks everybody for being here this month, and hope you enjoyed, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. And please think of Heritage Title as you have any upcoming listings. We would love to work with you. So thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Bye guys. Thanks, Liz.
Bye,
that was
guys.
fantastic.
Thanks,
Thank you.